Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again on our visual road trip. These California museums are near and dear to my heart, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. Now, remember last time we went to Oceanside Museum of Art, which is in one of the 14 cultural districts in California, so you definitely have to make that a destination. We went to the Laguna Art Museum, located exactly where the original artists set up their easels and painted that beautiful coastline. We went to UC Irvine and the California Museum of Art, which are combining these two incredible collections. And we are so looking forward to having their monumental museum built in the near future. We went to the Bowers, which is ranked #1 in Orange County. We went to the Norton Simon Art Museum with one of the most beautiful collections overall, encyclopedic collections in Southern California. All of these people who created these art museums, they invested in art because they knew they were investing in the future. And I want you to carry that along this evening. As you realize, and research has been done concerning this, that people who engage in the arts, actually who go to art museums, live a longer, happier life. So let that be a lesson to us. So tonight, we are going to the Huntington Museum and Gardens and Library, and I just want you to know that its shining glory is it has the only copy of the Gutenberg Bible on the West Coast. We're going to the Broad in LA, which opened in 2015. It has one of the most current contemporary art collections in the world. In fact, the Broad Foundation purchases one piece of contemporary artwork a week all year long and has for many years. Anyway, we're going to also go to the MOCA. It's a very small but very mighty contemporary showcase of American and European artists. We're going to go to the Getty in LA in the magnificent hills of Los Angeles. And then we're going to go on down to the Getty Villa, which is truly a gift to humankind of ancient masterpieces. So let's start. Buckle up because we're going on this adventure. As you can see this map of where we're going. The Huntington Library, Museum and Gardens was started by Henry Huntington. He was a railroad baron. You know, the history behind these collections is so interesting to me. These personalities are so interesting to me. He also, not only was a railroad baron, he worked with his uncle and then broke off after his uncle died and started his own trolley system throughout the LA area. But he also married his uncle's widow, who happened to be the richest woman in the United States at the time. Now, let me get to that top. But anyway, this is how the Huntington mansion looks at this point. This is how a postcard depicted it in the 1920s. So you can see it's a wonderful combination of neoclassical style, but also a little bit of Spanish colonial style. I think the architects did a brilliant job of creating this mansion for the Huntingtons. Here we are with Henry and Arabella. In 1903, he was so enraptured with LA. And remember, the railroad brought him out from the East Coast to the West Coast. He bought this little ranch, 600-acre lot for about $250,000. And this is what the museum looked like. As you can see, it's an expansive, wonderful forest and rolling hills and the mountains and the desert. And it truly is a jewel in the crown. Now, Arabella was very wealthy in her own right, as I've mentioned. She was married first as a very young woman. She was widowed. She started buying real estate in New York and ended up selling that real estate to J.D. Rockefeller. So she was very smart in her own right. So she married Henry's uncle. They were childless. And then when he died, she and Henry got together. They were kind of enamored of each other and they had all this money, So what are you going to do? You're going to buy art. And so Henry bought The Blue Boy by Thomas Gainsborough, very famous Rococo British artist. And he bought that painting for the highest sum ever paid for a painting ever. So about, a little over $700,000 in 1921. Well, I looked up how much that is worth today. It's about 10 million, so kind of worth its value, obviously. And also, Henry was having lunch downtown LA, and he had avocado salad. Well, he was so enamored with that fruit that he brought the pit home with him. And he actually started the avocado farming industry in Southern California. Thank you, Henry. So the other historical facts that I can tell you is that when Robert Rauschenberg, a very well-known pop artist, one of the most famous in the world, 20th century artist, decided to become an artist after visiting the Huntington art collection. And this is not in the collection, but this is a copy of Robert Rauschenberg's work. So you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, it's been in the news lately. In the Huntington mansion, they have this wonderful European gallery, portrait gallery. And they are going to send the Blue Boys. It's just been recently refurbished. The last time I was there, it was flat out in the gallery and they were conserving it, so to speak. They did x-rays and they cleaned it and everything else. But anyway, since it's going to be on loan, it's going back to London, they commissioned Keyhind Wiley to do a representation of a Blue Boy of today. So this is Keyhind Wiley. You probably know him because he did President Obama's presidential portrait. Well, Keyhind also grew up in LA and visited the Huntington. So Robert Rauschenberg was inspired to be an artist because of his visit, and so was Keyhind Wiley. And Keyhind, art imitating art. So what Keyhind does is he does these beautiful floral, Baroque backgrounds. Here's Keyhind himself with that kind of background. And then he did the Blue Boy there on the right. That's going to be in that gallery while this Blue Boy is on the road, so to speak. So here's what's a Blue Boy. I love this gallery because not only does it have a Gainsborough and the Blue Boy, let's see if I can show. Oh, it also has down the hall a Reynolds, Mrs. Siddons as a Tragic Muse. Now, Reynolds and Gainsborough were always kind of in competition with each other. And Reynolds he was in the London Academy of Art. They both were. And so Reynolds would say, well, there's, a good work of art has these 10 qualities, and one of them is don't use blue in your painting much, and so he did all of these kind of neoclassical poses as, in all these earthy tones. What does Gainsborough do? He does a boy dressed all in blue. So you think there was a little competition going on there? Yes, there was. So, the stories are fabulous behind works of art. So here's Keyhind's Blue Boy in that gallery, and you can see Mrs. Siddons here up on the right. So now they're going to be vying for attention. Also, this is back in the mansion. Here's Mrs. Huntington's fabulous dining room with all these great works of art surrounding you while you're having dinner. So much of their collection came from estates and castles in England or in Europe. They brought all this beautiful treasure trove of artwork back. Sometimes entire paneled rooms. This carpet is from Versailles, Louis XIV's carpet. These beautiful tapestries, these books. He just loved books. It was amazing. Mrs. Huntington loved art. And so she would decorate her mansion. She would bring things out to California. Of course, they were well-traveled. In fact, Mrs. Huntington spent 10 months a year, either in her apartments in New York or in Paris, and only spent 2 months a year in Southern California. So since she knew Venice, she had to have a Canaletto's Venice. Queen Elizabeth has about 200 Canalettos, but the Huntingtons have this one. They also have Turner's beautiful depiction of Venice as well. So their collection is beautiful and broad and lovely. And so they have lots of classical artwork. This is a newer wing. As you can see, it's much more modern. But since they have such a treasure trove, it just keeps expanding and expanding. So here's Arabella's French room collection in her New York mansion. And in 1928, they estimated this room was worth $31 million. Now, what drives up the cost of a lot of this is a lot of this French furniture, because if you go to Henry Frick's mansion, who was collecting about the same time on Park Avenue across from, of course, Central Park in New York, you're going to notice he has a lot of the same things. And one of the most expensive things in his collection is actually a French table like you see here in the middle. All right, so the vision on the left is Arabella's, one of her rooms, and all that wall covering that you see is actually velvet. So she hung her paintings on velvet. And you can see they collected a lot of medieval art as well. On the right side of your screen, Henry opened his library and art galleries to the public. In fact, I think in the beginning, he charged a whopping $7.50 to get in to his galleries. But you can see Pink Lady there and Blue Boy, a lot of variety. But then as the Huntington Foundation grew, they wanted to have a modern pavilion. You know, the definition of art keeps changing all the time. And so they wanted to have the classics along with more modern artwork. So this is another space that they have on the grounds. You can easily walk between them. And the neat part about it is the gardens. They have so many different gardens, but across the way, he's got his library, of course, with these astrological things. He's got the Gutenberg Bible on display. He's got famous historical United States documents. He was quite a collector. And so you can also go into the library. Thousands of books, beautiful books, lots of science. He loved research. And these are the gardens that I'm talking about. He's got a Chinese garden. He's got a Japanese garden. He's got succulent gardens. He's got rose gardens. And they just completed, the Chinese garden, they just completed a $55 million renovation. So you have the tranquility of the water, and you've got bridges, and you've got pagodas. And these are some scenes from the Japanese garden. The one on the upper left, just beautiful pavilions and places to eat. Here's the Garden of Flowing Fragrance that I just mentioned for $55 million. I saw it when it was in the process of renovation. You could see great things were going to happen. Here's a pagoda. You feel like you're transported to these exotic lands, and that's what Henry wanted. He wanted to educate the public about the power of art and the dignity of art. And he wanted the Americans to rise to that. Oh, and you can also go to the Jade Cafe for lunch on the grounds. Here's some Japanese gardens. You can see the Impressionists' influences from Japan. And, you know, like the Monet's garden at Giverny has that wonderful little arched bridge. So everyone was crazy about Japanese things at the time. Oh, and you can go through lots of cacti in the succulent gardens. You can go through the rose gardens. Oh, it's just a sensory experience to go to the Huntington. What a jewel. So in 2019, they had a 100-year celebration. And if you go on their website, you can look up 100 interesting facts about the Huntington to celebrate their 100 years being here in Southern California, enriching our lives so much. Now we're going to go on to the Broad, to another Los Angeles visionary, Eli and Edie Broad. Eli was a very successful businessman. And I love this quote that he says, that civilizations are not remembered by business people, bankers, or lawyers. They are remembered by the arts. Now, if you really look at art and civilization, the word actually means living in cities. And so once human beings had enough freedom from like just existing, they could start making their lives beautiful. And so art started many, many eons ago, of course. Anyway, so Eli and Edie, very interesting couple. He got his start by buying a small business and working with some of Edie's relatives. And in fact, Edie's father gave him $50,000 to start that business. Well, Edie is the one that loved art from a very young age when she was going to the Michigan Institute, the Detroit Institute of Arts. She went on an art field trip. She brought home a little postcard. I think it was of a Picasso or something. And then later in her life, she started collecting art. with Eli. And in fact, in the 60s, they would go downtown through the galleries and they'd meet the artists and they'd pick up, a Rauschenberg, a Warhol, whatever. And then they used to have their collection go all over the world. They would lend their collection, but then he decided, I'm going to build my own museum. So in 2015, this beautiful structure opened. I've brought many groups through the Broad. They're just awestruck every time. I really appreciate the Broads because they always hire female architects. So when he created an art museum on his alma mater, Michigan State, they asked Zaha Hadid to build his museum. And in this time in LA, he asked Elizabeth Diller, and a renowned architect, to do his Broad downtown. Now, if you look in the back, you can see just across the street is the Disney Concert Hall. Eli was instrumental in getting that building done and functioning. In fact, Frank Gehry is the architect of the Disney Concert Hall, and Edie and Eli had Gehry do their home in LA. But anyway, I could go on and on about that. But what I like about Elizabeth's construction here, this is called the veil and the vault construction. So the vault is the interior, that's where the artwork is. And the veil is that beautiful skin of the building that you just saw. This is in process. You can see the organics of the design. It is gorgeous. You go in there, you can't believe it. So yeah, there's the Disney Concert Hall. There's the Broad sitting down there. And we will go into it in just a minute. So Eli is very instrumental in bringing culture to downtown LA and making it what it is today. So here's some of that organic architecture that you saw. You have an escalator leading upstairs. You've got a stairway. Elizabeth Diller did this wonderful glass wall where diffused light comes into the museum. When you're waiting in line to get your time ticket to get into the museum, you go under the veil and then you go up into this incredible space that just explodes with contemporary art. Everywhere you look, you see a Jeff Koons, you see a Julian Snavo, you see a Kara Walker, you see a Cindy Sherman, you just see all the main hits. You see Mark Bradford. It just goes on and on and on. And this wonderful tube elevator that they have. And the floor between this upper level and the lower level is their vault, actually, where you can actually peer in and see some of the artwork that's not hung up at the time. Anyway, it's fabulous. The first thing that the Broads bought back in the 60s was a Van Gogh drawing for $95,000. Well, they kind of rethought their collecting habits and they bought a Rauschenberg instead. That's because they wanted to buy art of their time. They want to be like Peggy Guggenheim, who came before them. And they said, you've got to buy art from living artists. Don't wait for people to die to buy their stuff. And so they were very good friends with Rauschenberg. They were very good friends with Jeff Koons. You can have one of those balloon dogs. See that blue balloon dog that Jeff Koons did? You can pick one of those up for roughly $50 million now. Several people have bought that. So just so you know what the Broads are doing. Here's more Jeff Koons. What I like about the Broad collection is they just didn't pick like one Rauschenberg and one Jasper Johns and one Jeff Koons. No, they are one Andy Warhol. They have a vast array of several of their works, along with some older masters like Juan Miró, Pablo Picasso. They have several pieces by Roy Lichtenstein. This is a play on the different versions of the Rouen Cathedral by Claude Monet. And so he did them with his Bende dots. They loved Roy Lichtenstein. Here's a close-up of those Bende dots. He invented a system to make those perfect dots. And there's the Rouen Cathedral that Claude Monet did several of. And there's Lichtenstein's answer to it. Lichtenstein's always bringing history into his artwork. Pop artists like Rauschenberg. It's another good one. These are very large. Jasper Johns, who's still living today, wonderful to hear that. Just went to a large exhibition of his work at the Whitney in New York City. Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns were very good friends. This is an assemblage, so it's three-dimensional, painting and sculpture. Jasper John's famous for his flags. He uses encaustic paint too. So encaustic paint is what the Egyptians and the Greeks used a lot in their artwork. And so he's also referencing back to art history. Murakami, a famous Japanese artist, does these, what they call super flat paintings. So what does it allude to? The super flatness of his beautiful enameled paintings and also of his culture, Japan, super flat. In other words, not exuding a lot of personality. That's another story. Anyway, this is a great mural that Murakami did, 82-foot long mural. And it's like the history of Japan. It's the good side of Japan. It's the atrocities they did during World War II. It's got evil spirits. It's got beautiful little dogs and people. It's like a Chinese scroll. You know, it's like a movie. It's like a motion picture. Julian Schnabel, an American artist who does these really crazy three-dimensional paintings. This is just the side view from the Schnabel. And this is called The Walk Home. So you're going through a forest. These are all broken plates, it's straw, sometimes it's dead birds. You know, he just puts everything up there. Chuck Close. Now, Chuck's had a rough time. You know, he died lately, but he was accused of sexual harassment. So what I've noticed when I go through art museums lately in the last year or so is people have taken their Chuck Close paintings down. You know, if they were going to do that for every scallywag artist in the world, you know, all the Picassos would be down, there'd be so many people down. But anyway, this is the scale that Chuck Close used. This is my husband standing next to a Chuck Close portrait. So what Chuck Close would do is he would get really up close and personal. These are all airbrushed and you can see every little pore, every little whisker, every little wrinkle, and it like gives you license to stare. You know, usually you don't stare at people, but this way you can scrutinize every detail. And that's what art is all about. You want to get close and personal to a work of art. You want to feel its warmth, its energy, its excitement, its story. Anyway, Yayoi Kusama is another brilliant Japanese artist, and she does these infinity rooms. So, well, this infinity room happens to be at the Broad. You get 45 seconds in it. And it's an incredible experience, just say that. Elanutsi is another artist. He's from Ghana, and the Broads have befriended him. The interesting story about Elanutsi is that all of his incredibly large, they look like fabrics, but they're not. They're wall hangings that are actually made out of the neck, what do I want to say? The foil neck caps around liquor bottles. Now, the story behind this, and I also give lectures on how to appreciate contemporary art, because a lot of people don't. Anyway, the story behind this is he's alluding back to the history of his country. In Ghana, they used to sell their own people to Europeans, and they would trade them for liquor. So people for liquor. Anyway, that's a tremendous story. So here's Edie and Eli, and they're in their 80s now, but this is much younger. And these portraits were done by the very famous photographer, Robert Mapplethorpe. And I think he's captured their vital life together. Anyway, they're good friends with Andy Warhol. So they've got lots of Warhols. Here's Marilyn's, the Andy Warhol's candle soup cans, his Elvis prints, other things. Andy Warhol, you think he's this kind of frivolous guy, but he's not really. He's really hardworking, very thoughtful, really a great guy. I got to tell you this story though. Edie and Eli were sitting in an auction of some of these Campbell soup can prints, and they were bidding up. Other people were bidding. And finally, I think one of them sold for like $100 million. Was it 100? Something like that. And Edie leaned over to Eli and said, "What fool just paid $100 million, or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't $100 million, it was $10 million for that print?" And Eli leaned back at her and said, "We did." So anyway, they've got a lot of Campbell soup cans done by Andy Warhol. And this is Andy Warhol's Chairman Mao, which are very huge. So all these are in the collection. And like I said, they were friends with Andy Warhol. They were friends with Warhol's friend and protege, Jean-Michel Basquiat. So they have lots of Basquiats. This head on the right-hand side is one of my favorite all-time paintings because Basquiat, a very young man, I think he died when he was 29 or something. You can see this is kind of a self-portrait. And you can see that it's a little bit of abstract expressionism, it's surrealism, it's pop art. It's so imbued with what was going on in the country at the time. Incredible stuff. Anyway, another good friend of theirs was Keith Haring, another pop artist. You can see the vitality of Keith's work. So energetic, childlike, kind of futuristic, just fun. Oh, another favorite piece of mine. I've got to move along, sorry. Just get so involved in the Broad. Janine Antoni. Oh, she's a fabulous artist. What I have, the story behind this is she was talking about family and mom and dad and how you think about your parents. And sometimes you think of your parents as like the same thing, you really don't separate them. So what she did here on the far left is there's her dad on the left. To his right is her mother, made up to look like her father. In the middle section, we have her father made up to look like her mother, and her mother to look like her dad, and then, vice versa down the line. Oh, she did such incredible things. Her latest thing, which isn't at the Broad, is called Lick and Lather, where she did a bust of herself, 20 busts in soap and 20 busts in chocolate. Lick and Lather. Oh, it's a darling piece. So John Baldessari, another person that we lost this year, did these kind of tongue-in-cheek artworks. And this is one. He says, tips for artists who want to sell. Bright colored paintings sell faster. Madonna child still lifes sell faster. And then subject matter too. So he's kind of telling you what galleries and collectors sell. I mean, it's just so funny. Okay, Robert Therian. This table is huge. It must be the table must be 10 feet tall at least, because you can walk under it. It's called Under the Table. So it's kind of like what children see and do. Oh, it's just fun. Damien Hirst, who has an obsession with death. So he formaldehydes these dead animals in these cases. So again, you can actually stare at things that are dead, that used to be alive. Oh, he's amazing. And they also have the most complete collection of Cindy Sherman's photographs in the world, I think. And she was named one of the most influential people by Time magazine, as was Murakami, as were many of these artists. It's just amazing. But anyway, Cindy's story is that she does herself. All of these are Cindy's, but she dresses up herself and puts herself in different situations, usually like from black and white movie stills, color movie stills. She too harkens back to art history and dresses herself up as these artistic icons. Then she kind of got in trouble for the Southern California look. But I mean, that's another story. But they have a very complete collection of Cindy. And this is the real Cindy here on the left. Now, if you want a really delicious treat, you can go to the Odeum, which is right next door to the Broad. It's kind of the restaurant of the Broad. Just make reservations far in advance. And this is where food is art, and it's also delicious. Okay, moving across the street, we're going to go to the MOCA, the Art Institute for Artists of Our Time. Again, it's like I mentioned, Peggy Guggenheim influenced her uncle Solomon to create the Guggenheim in New York City and only collected living artist work. Anyway, same thing happened, like I told you last time. It's a bunch of people got together. They threw some ideas around. Instead of New York people, these were LA people. So Tom Bradley, the mayor of LA at the time, and Miriam Simon of Norton Simon, his sister, they were at a dinner party and they said, you know what we need to do in LA? We need a contemporary art museum of living artists. At this time, they have over 7,000 artworks in their collection. And this is across the street from the Broad. So you can easily see the Disney Concert Hall, the Broad, and the MOCA at the same time. The architect, Isozaki, did the building. It's all subterranean. The artwork is underground. This is the beautiful commons area. This is where you can wait to go in this Californian sunshine. This is a Nancy Rubin sculpture. What Nancy did was take all these airplane parts and string them back together. It's monumental. And look how she balances them on one little foot, and everything just explodes around it. It's amazing sculpture. Anyway, amazing collection too. Here we have a sculpture by Max Ernst. We have a painting by Arshile Gorky, next to a Lee Krasner, next to a Louise Nevelson, and next to Alberto Giacometti. Now, when I walked into the MOCA for the first time and I came around that corner and I saw that Krasner and that Nevelson, I was impressed. Not often do you go into contemporary art museums and see so many women represented. So right on, MOCA. They have a lot of special exhibitions. They had one a few years ago by Kerry James Marshall. I particularly appreciate him because he's a Chicago boy. We also have other contemporary art, very creatively curated. And these are some of their wide open spaces. It's small, like I said, but it's a very mighty museum. Here we have a Franz Klein, a John Chamberlain, amazing stuff. They have these 3 Rothkos just hanging in the same room. And Rothko, a lot of collectors have his work. The art museum where I used to teach from, University of Illinois, had a Rothko. And many years ago, a Rothko sold for $130 million. Well, guess what our museum did? They promptly took the Rothko off the wall. Too valuable to be on site, I guess. I think they've reinstated it now, though. But these quivering masses of color really do strike you. Wonderful. And another special exhibition that we were privileged to go through by Lauren Halsey, an LA woman who is like, I love this. I think this was called We Still Here. In other words, yeah, you're trying to tear down all our neighborhoods and gentrify everything, but we're still here. And so all these wonderful clouds and rocks that she had installed in these exhibition spaces. And then she had like these little icons from LA and her childhood and where she grew up and where African Americans came from. It was really intriguing. And they also are having this wonderful retrospect coming in 2022. So these museums are meant to be visited often. But anyway, Henry Taylor's coming to their museum. All right, so we're hungry, we've been going through all this. We're gonna take Angel's Flight down, which is just steps away from the MOCA, down to Grand Central Market. And actually, it was just in the Los Angeles Times that the Grand Central Market is ranked in the 101 best restaurants in LA. So here's Angel's Flight. You can take that down for $1 or $2, whatever, yeah, or you can walk. And then when you go to the Grand Central Market, it's just an array of international foods and desserts and treats. Too many to take in. Okay, let's go a little further. And we're going to go see John Paul Getty's center. John Paul Getty, well, he was quite a character. They've made movies about him. They've written about him. He made his money through oil. So can't get enough oil. The interesting thing is, toward the end of his life, I think the last 18 years of his life, he changed his will 21 times. I think his children and grandchildren were all rubbing their little hands with glee, but he left it to his trust. And when after he died and the trustees got a hold of his will, it went up exponentially. In other words, they were going to, I think they had a budget of $3 million a year. It went up to $50 million a year. And this was back in the late 70s. So they were all really nervous, what are we going to do with all that money? And they were worried that they would just be spending it right and left on what, So just backtrack a little bit about Getty. This is his place in England. He said he bought this estate in England because it was cheaper to live in London than it was in New York City. So this is him in front of his place. He was notoriously cheap. I guess one story was he was taking a group of friends to a dog show in London, and he made them walk around the block a few times until they could get in at 5 because it was cheaper after 5. So all of his guests had to wait till then. This man was, I think it was in the 60s, or it was the richest man in the world. But I guess he got rich by making his friends wait till 5 to get in. Anyway, $2 million a year to $30 million a year. But here he is in his beautiful palace. I love this part of the Getty in that you can go to this wall. Actually, it extends a lot further than this. And you can read about his life, about his beginnings, about his life, and about his collecting. It's notorious. I'll say that story for later. But anyway, in back in the 80s, this is after he died, about 10 years after he died, the trustees decided we're going to go and we're going to interview people, museums, educational areas, research institutions, universities, and see where the art world in the United States is lacking. What we really need to do to bring art into the 21st century. And this is how the Getty Center was born. So Richard Meier is the architect, and he wanted to, what do I want to say? Bring not only nature and art together. He wanted to make this a totally sensual experience with the art, the architecture, and nature. So we are in the hills of California. And I'll never forget when the Getty first opened and I wanted to bring my parents and children up, you had to reserve a parking spot because they thought it was going to be so popular. So you had to reserve a parking spot. You get out of the parking lot, you get on this tram, and it takes you in a winding path all the way to the top. And so you come up and you're surrounded by these gorgeous buildings and plazas and gardens. You can see that his love of these kind of secret gardens. So he incorporated these gardens that you would find a little different, however, in the English gardens, the mazes and things, and all the different trees, and the views of LA and the ocean are just incredible from all these different plazas. But back to this, how the trustees went around and asked what we needed for art. And they said, well, universities only look at like the history of the art and how that involves the art. Other museums want to go for high quality artwork. Some places want to go to conservation. Others want to do just education about art. We're going to combine all of those. So we're going to do research, education, conservation. We're going to get the best artwork. And we're also going to incorporate it with history. So these pavilions hold all of those things. And of course, you have to go to a gift shop. But this is what they have in their collection. They have antiquities, drawings, manuscripts, paintings, photographs. Have you ever looked up anything online and you'll see Getty across the image? That because they own that image. And when I was a university professor, they had what they called Art Store. And any educator could go into their system and get your choice of all these images and put them in this advanced PowerPoint presentation. Getty did so much for education and university and other art teachers around the world. And they also have sculpture and decorative arts, which I'll get into. So you go through all these galleries in this very modern building, but then you're immersed into the classics. You're immersed into French illuminated manuscripts from the 13th century, 14th century, 15th century. I mean, it's amazing the collection they have. Here's some proto-Renaissance portraits. You can see some images, drawings by Sarto and Michelangelo. You can see Mannerist examples. Mannerism came right after the Renaissance. So it was painted in the manner of the Renaissance, but Mannerism was much more expressive and emotional. And so you have this portrait by Portormo, and you can see how elongated and flame-like this gentleman is, much like some of El Greco's work as well. Anyway, they've got Rembrandt's. They think this is a self-portrait, a young man laughing. Well, if you're a poor artist, what are you going to paint? Oh, you can paint yourself. Practice that way. Recently, they've gotten a Manet here on the left. They had Artemisia Gentileschi, a famous Renaissance Italian female painter. Just amazing stuff. Oh, and then he also has these paneled rooms where he bought these rooms, whole rooms, floors, ceilings, everything, transported them then to his collection. He's got Watteaus. That's Rococo artists, which came after Baroque. He's got Monet's, many Impressionist paintings. He's got Degas, Cézanne's. And then they bought Van Gogh's irises. This is quite large. It's at the end of a gallery. It's beautiful. You walk around the corner, down at the end, you've got the irises, just an incredible painting by Van Gogh. You can still see some of the canvas, which is bright orange. So, Van Gogh's underpainting to bring all these colors out was a flaming orange color. Anyway, you could talk about this and analyze this painting forever, because that white iris in the midst of all those purple irises, Van Gogh always felt like a loner. So that could be his symbol for being alone. But more about that. Anyway, they wouldn't disclose how much they paid for that particular piece. Oh, they do lots of educational programming, so here you have a docent talking about this Gauguin sculpture, but wait, it wasn't. That sculpture, which they paid, I don't know, $3 or $5 million for about 20 years ago, turns out not to be a Gauguin. Well, there's a long convoluted story how they figured out it wasn't a Gauguin. They think someone else in Polynesia created that because it's not on the same type of pedestal that Gauguin would have used and all these other stories. But this print down here on the lower right is actually a Gauguin, and you can see that god or spirit-like figure in it. So immediately everybody thought, oh, that's a Gauguin. So Getty cannot call it a Gauguin anymore. They'll just put unknown under that particular piece. So museums are always going through that. Anyway, they have famous contemporary artwork as well. Here's a David Hockney. Oh, and then I wanted to mention, remember when what fire was that called in the LA hills? I'm trying to remember now. But this fire surrounded the Getty. People were so nervous. I was ready to grab a water bucket and go up there myself, but not to worry. Richard Meier was really smart. And when he designed the Getty and their grounds, he did water tanks that crushed travertine on the outside of the buildings and on the roofs. You cannot burn the Getty. You cannot burn this multi-billion-dollar property. It was amazing. He did so much more fireproofing as well. You can see that he's got sprinkler systems. He's got vaulted doors. The sprinkler systems come on at the last resort. They have heavy stone walls that protect. They even had that barrier in between the wall and the gallery walls. I mean, they went to great extremes to make this a safe place. And they do lots of current exhibitions. This one is exploring relationships between past and present artists. So here on the right, you have kind of a family together. Here on the left, you have a family that's a little more current. Oh, they do wonderful things up there, creating the past and the present. My favorite restaurant in Santa Monica is called Tar and Roses. And I just love their place. I love their attitude. I love their service. I love their food. And this is the signature dessert that we get every time. So I suggest Tar and Roses. And it's always fun to walk to the Santa Monica Pier. And then, if you want to sleep overnight, you can tuck in at the Lowe's, which is wonderful. And it has a great view of the Santa Monica Pier. Now, our last stop, and I know I've got to be quick, is the Getty Villa and Gardens. Yes, J.P. Getty loved to collect ancient artifacts from Greek and Rome. Oh, it's just amazing. He admired those classics so much that he wanted to create a villa. Actually, it's a replica of a villa in Pompeii that was preserved by Mount Vesuvius's ashes. Anyway, the story behind JP is that he bought the cheaper broken pieces of ancient art just to get them cheap and just to say, oh yeah, I got so many Roman pieces of art. But that's okay. There's some really great ones there as well. But so in the Pacific Palisades, near Malibu, you've got this palatial Romanesque palace full of his artwork. And so these are the gardens, again, just beautifully done. And like I said, the gardens and architecture are modeled after the Villa de Pier Paris. Sorry, I can't say that right. A seaside estate. Well, this is on the seaside as well. Let me show you that. Oh, this wonderful amphitheater. The Greeks really did a number on amphitheaters. They cannot be bested even in today's world. And of course, the Romans copied everything the Greeks did. So there is a Roman amphitheater on the grounds where they do performances. Now, the interior galleries are where the art, of course, where the art is. And so, as you can see in Roman architecture, the outside is really very plain, but inside you have this beautiful atriums, gardens, pools of water. So it's definitely modeled on Roman structure. Inside you have beautiful travertine floors and examples of Greek and Roman art. As you can see, some of the heads are missing, the noses are broken off. That's pretty typical. Because as you know, when the Christians took over, they took all those false idols and threw them into ashen pits that really didn't re-emerge until the Renaissance. So these were highly decorated at one time with color. And their marble statuaries were actually painted in realistic ways. And so that figure down the hall there would have been sheathed in flesh-like tones. His eyes would have had alabaster in them or some lifelike thing. His hair would have been painted. This one, Alexander the Great, the head of Alexander the Great, the interesting thing about broken noses on ancient artists is that when the pagans came by and they would see these godlike creatures, they probably didn't even know who it was, they broke their noses off because if the gods can't breathe, they can't live. And so symbolically, they would take the noses off to kill them. Oh, well, here's a Roman atrium. We could talk more about Roman architecture. Bronzes, marbles, beautiful things. You just feel like you're there when you're there. In a sarcophagus, sarcophagus means flesh-eating stone. And of course, they would put dead bodies in sarcophagi. So sarcophagus is a Greek word. Oh, the craters, the beautiful pots. These pots were done a couple centuries in Greece. Without this work, we would not know what Greek and Roman art or life was like. We wouldn't know what they wore, what they honored symbolically. You know, these pots, just to talk to you about these, the Greeks modeled everything on geometry. So perfect proportions, perfect human proportions, perfect pot proportion. You've got the mouth of the pot, the neck, the body, the foot of the pot. Everything had to have kind of like a geometric, analytical, mathematical proportion to it. And the interesting thing about these black and orange pots is that they were done by two people. One person did the pot, the other person did the painting, and they would sign them. The Greeks signed their artwork. Anyway, frescoes replicated in the villa. And I wanted to show you this aerial view before we got off of where his villa is situated. So it's by the sea and the mountains up. So thank you, JP, for all that you've done. And thank you to all the fabulous art collectors, Henry Huntington, Edie and Eli Broad, JP Getty as well. And so Oceanside Museum of Art has all kinds of great art adventures in the future. Look forward to, thanks to Adam. I want everyone to have a happy holiday, healthy new year, and realize that I have enjoyed giving these lectures and talks to you very much.